Hi boys and girls. Today I'm going to continue to read Charlotte's Web. But before I start with chapter 4, let's just refresh our memories. So we know that Fern has a pig named Wilbur, and Wilbur lives on Uncle Homer's farm. It's called the Zuckerman's farm. And when we left off with chapter 3, Wilbur was talking to some of the other animals in the barn and they told him to escape. And if you remember, he was running, he went through the loose board in the fence, and he was running outside and everybody was telling him which way to go and which way to turn and which way to flip and flop. And he got so confused. And then Uncle Homer and Lurvy came over to get him and they lured him back into the pig pen with a bucket of slops. And Wilbur was just so tired. He's sad because he doesn't have any friends and he misses Fern. And at the end of chapter 3, he just laid down and went to bed. Chapter 4 is where we're going to pick up today, and it's called Loneliness. The next day was rainy and dark. Rain fell on the roof of the barn and dripped all through the cracks. Rain fell down through the barnyard. It went across the grass and through the pigweed. It splattered on Mrs. Zuckerman's kitchen window and it came gushing down through the downpour spouts. The sheep were out there and they were tired of standing in the rain too, so they slowly walked up the lane. Rain upset Wilbur's plans for the day. He had planned to go outside. He wanted to dig a new hole in the yard. He had other plans too. His plans for the day went something like this. He was going to eat breakfast at 6:30. He was going to have skim milk and some crusts, bits of donuts, wheat cakes, drops of maple syrup that was sticking on pancakes, potato skins, leftover pudding, raisins, and bits of shredded wheat. That was going to be all of the slops. Breakfast would be finished around 7. Then from 7 to 8, Wilbur planned to have a talk with Templeton. That was the rat who lived under his trough. Talking with Templeton was not the most interesting occupation in the world, but it was better than nothing. From 8 till 9, Wilbur planned to take a nap, and he wanted to lay outside in the sun. From 9 to 11, he planned to dig another hole and possibly find something good to eat that was buried in the dirt. From 11 to 12, he planned to stand still and watch the flies, and watch the bees, and watch the swallows fly through the air. At 12 o'clock, it would have been lunchtime. He was hoping he'd have some warm water, some apples, meat gravy, carrot scrapings, meat scraps, the wrapper of a package of cheese, and maybe even any more bits and pieces. And then lunch would be over around 1. From 1 to 2, Wilbur planned to sleep. From 2 to 3, he planned to scratch itchy places on his back by rubbing against the fence. From 3 to 4, he planned to stand perfectly still and just think about what it was like to be alive. And then he would wait for Fern. At 4 would come supper. Skim milk, some leftover sandwich from Lurvy's lunchbox, prune skins, a morsel of this, a little bit of that, maybe some fried potatoes, a little more of this, a little more of that, a piece of baked apple pie, and maybe a scrap of upside down cake. Wilbur had gone to sleep thinking about these plans last night. He awoke at 6 and he saw the rain, and it seemed as though he couldn't bear it. He said, "I get everything all beautifully planned out in my mind, and now it has to go and rain." For a while, he stood gloomingly indoors. Then he walked to the door and looked out. Drops of rain struck him right in the head. His yard was cold and wet. His trough had an inch of rainwater in it, and Templeton was nowhere to be seen. "Are you out there, Templeton?" Wilbur called. There was no answer, and Wilbur felt lonely and friendless. "Oh," he groaned, "just one day like another. I'm very young and I have no friends here in the barn. It's going to rain all morning and all afternoon, and Fern won't come here in such bad weather. Oh, honestly." And Wilbur was crying again for the second time in 2 days. At 6:30, Wilbur heard the banging of a pail. Lurvy was standing outside in the rain, stirring up his breakfast. Lurvy was hollering, "Come on, Pig! Come on, Pig!" Wilbur did not budge. Lurvy dumped the slops, scraped the pail, and walked away. He noticed that something was wrong with the pig. Wilbur didn't want food. He wanted love. He wanted a friend, someone who would play with him. So he mentioned this to the goose, who was sitting quietly in the corner. He said, "Will you come over and play with me?" "Sorry, Sonny, sorry," said the goose. I'm sitting on my eggs. 8 of them. Gotta keep them toasty, oasty warm. I have to stay right here. I'm no flibberty-ibberty-gibbet. I do not play when there are eggs to hatch. I'm expecting goslings." "Well, I didn't think you were expecting woodpeckers," said Wilbur. Wilbur next tried one of the lambs. He said, "Will you play with me?" "Certainly not," said the lamb. "In the first place, I cannot get into your pen, and I'm not old enough to jump over the fence. In the second place, I'm not interested in pigs. Pigs mean less than nothing to me." "What do you mean, less than nothing?" replied Wilbur. "I don't think there is any such thing as less than nothing. Nothing is absolutely the limit of nothingness. It's the lowest you can go. It's the end of the line. How can something be less than nothing? If there were something that was less than nothing, then nothing would be nothing. It would be something, and even though it's just very little of something. But if nothing is nothing, then nothing has nothing that is less than it." "Oh, be quiet," said the lamb. "Go play by yourself. I don't play with pigs." Sadly, Wilbur lay down and listened to the rain. Soon he saw the rat climbing down a board that he used as a stairway. And Wilbur said, "Will you play with me, Templeton?" "Play?" said Templeton. "Play? I hardly know the meaning of the word." "Well," said Wilbur, "it means to have fun, to frolic, to run and skip and make merry." "I never do things like that if I can avoid them," replied the rat. "I prefer to spend my time eating and gnawing and spying and hiding. I am a glutton, not a merrymaker. Right now I am on my way to your trough to eat your breakfast, since you haven't got enough sense to eat it yourself." And Templeton, the rat, crept along the wall and disappeared into a private tunnel that he had dug between the door and the trough in Wilbur's yard. Templeton was a crafty rat, and he had things pretty much his own way. The tunnel was an example of his skill and cunning. The tunnel enabled him to get from the barn to his hiding place all the way to the pig trough without running or anywhere near Mr. Zuckerman. That way he could sneak around. Usually he slept during the daytime, and he was moving all around throughout the night. Wilbur watched him disappear in his tunnel. In a moment, he saw the rat's sharp nose poke up from underneath his trough. Cautiously, Templeton pulled himself up over the trough and looked around. This was almost more than Wilbur could stand. On this dreary, rainy, dark day, to see his breakfast being eaten by somebody else. He knew Templeton was getting soaked out there in the pouring rain, but even that didn't make Wilbur happy. Friendlessly, dejected and hungry, Wilbur threw himself down in the manure and sobbed. Late that afternoon, Lurvy went to Mr. Zuckerman and he said, "I think there's something wrong with that pig of yours. He hasn't touched his food." Mr. Zuckerman told Lurvy, "Give him 2 spoonfuls of sulfur and a little molasses." Wilbur couldn't believe what was happening to him when Lurvy caught him and forced the medicine down his throat. This was certainly the worst day of his life. He didn't know whether he could endure the awful loneliness anymore. Darkness settled over everything. Soon there were only shadows and the noise of the sheep chewing their food, an occasional rattle of a cow chain up overhead. You can imagine Wilbur's surprise when out of the darkness came a small voice that he had never heard before. It sounded rather thin but pleasant. The voice said, "Do you want a friend, Wilbur? I'll be a friend to you. I've watched you all day, and I like you." But I can't see you," said Wilbur, jumping to his feet. "Where are you, and who are you?" "I'm right up here," said the voice. "Now go to sleep, and you'll see me in the morning." Chapter 5 is called Charlotte. The night seemed long. Wilbur's stomach was empty, but his mind was full. And when your stomach's empty and your mind is full, it's very hard to sleep. A dozen times during the night, Wilbur woke up and stared into the blackness, looking and listening to the sounds and trying to figure out what time it was. A barn is never perfectly quiet. Even at midnight, there's usually something stirring. The first time he woke, he heard Templeton gnawing in a hole. Templeton's teeth scraped loudly against the wood, and it made quite a racket. "That crazy rat," thought Wilbur. "Why does he have to stay up all night, grinding his teeth and destroying people's property? Why can't he go to sleep like decent animals?" The second time Wilbur woke, he heard the goose turning on her nest and chuckling to herself. "What time is it?" Wilbur whispered to the goose. Probably about 11:30, said the goose. "Why aren't you asleep, Wilbur?" Wilbur said, "I have too many things on my mind." "Well," said the goose, "that's not my trouble. I have nothing at all on my mind, but I have too many things under my behind. Have you ever tried to sleep while sitting on 8 eggs? "No," replied Wilbur. "I suppose it is uncomfortable. How long does it take a goose to hatch eggs?" Approximately 30 days, all told," answered the goose. "But I cheat a little. On warm afternoons, I just pull a little straw over the eggs and I go out for a walk." Wilbur yawned and went back to sleep. In his dreams, he heard again the voice saying, "I'll be a friend to you. Go to sleep. You'll see me in the morning." About half an hour before dawn, Wilbur woke and listened. The barn was still dark. The sheep lay motionless. Even the goose was quiet. Overhead on the main floor, nothing stirred. The cows were resting and the horses were sleeping. Templeton had quit work and he'd gone off somewhere. The only sound was a slight scraping noise from the rooftop, where the weather vane swung back and forth. Wilbur loved the barn when it was like this, calm and quiet and waiting for daylight. "Day is almost here," he thought. Through a small window, a faint gleam appeared. One by one, the stars went out. Wilbur could see the goose a few feet away. She sat with her head tucked under a wing. Then he could see the sheep and the lambs, and the light started to brighten up in the sky. "Oh, beautiful day! It is here at last. Today I shall find my friend," he said. Wilbur looked everywhere. He searched his pen thoroughly. He examined the window ledge. He stared up at the ceiling. But he saw nothing new. Finally, he decided he would have to speak up. He hated to break the lovely silence of dawn by using his voice, but he couldn't think of any other way to locate his mysterious new friend. So Wilbur cleared his throat. "Ahem," he said. "Attention, please. Will the party who addressed me at bedtime last night kindly make himself or herself known by giving an appropriate sign or signal?" Wilbur paused and listened. All the other animals lifted their heads and stared at him. Wilbur blushed, but he was determined to get in touch with his new unknown friend. "Attention, please," he said again. "I will repeat my message. Will the party who addressed me at bedtime last night kindly speak up? Please tell me where you are, if you are my friend." The sheep looked at each other in disgust. The oldest sheep yelled, "Stop your nonsense, Wilbur. If you have a new friend here, you are probably disturbing his rest. And the quickest way to spoil a friendship is to wake somebody up in the morning before he is ready. How can you be sure your friend is an early riser?" Wilbur whispered, "I beg everyone's pardon. I didn't mean to wake you." He laid back down meekly in his manure, facing the door. He did not know it, but his friend was very near. And the old sheep was right. The friend was still asleep. Soon Lurvy appeared with slops for breakfast. Wilbur rushed out, ate everything in a hurry, and licked the trough clean. The sheep moved down the lane. The gander waddled along behind them, pulling grass. And then, just as Wilbur was settling down for his morning nap, he heard again that thin voice that had addressed him the night before. And the voice said, "Salutations." Wilbur jumped to his feet. "What?" he said. The voice repeated, "Salutations." "What are they and where are you?" screamed Wilbur. "Please, please tell me where you are. And what are salutations?" "Salutations are greetings," said the voice. "When I say salutations, it's my fancy way of saying hello or good morning. Actually, it's a silly expression, and I am surprised that I used it at all. As for my whereabouts, that's easy. Look up here in the corner of the doorway. Here I am. Look, I'm waving." At last, Wilbur saw the creature that had spoken to him in such a kindly way. Stretched across the upper part of the doorway was a big spider web. And hanging from the top of the web, head down, was a large gray spider. She was about the size of a gumdrop. She had 8 legs, and she was waving with one of them at Wilbur in a friendly greeting. Can you see me now? And there's Wilbur. He's looking at Charlotte. "Oh, yes, indeed," said Wilbur. "Yes, indeed. How are you? Good morning. Salutations. Very pleased to meet you. What is your name, please? May I have your name?" "My name," said the spider, "is Charlotte." "Charlotte what?" asked Wilbur eagerly. "Charlotte A. Cavatica. But just call me Charlotte." "I think you're beautiful, Charlotte," said Wilbur. "Well, I am very pretty," she replied. "There's no denying that. After all, spiders are rather nice looking. I'm not as flashy as some, but I'll do. I wish I could see you, Wilbur, as clearly as you can see me. Why can't you see me? He asked. I'm right here. Yes, she said, but I'm nearsighted. I've always been dreadfully nearsighted. It's good in some ways, but not so good in others. Watch me wrap up this fly, she said. A fly that had been crawling along Wilbur's trough had flown up and got stuck in the lower part of Charlotte's web and was tangled in the sticky threads. The fly was beating its wings furiously, trying to break loose and free itself from the web. First, said Charlotte, I dive at him. She plunged headfirst towards the fly. As she dropped, a tiny silken thread unwound from near her rear end. Next, I wrap him up. She grabbed the fly, threw a few jets of silk around it, and rolled it over and over, wrapping it up so it couldn't move. Wilbur watched in horror. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. And although he detested flies, he did feel sorry for this one. There, said Charlotte. Now I knock him out, so he'll be more comfortable. And then she bit the fly. He can't feel a thing now, she said. He'll make a perfect breakfast for me. You mean you eat flies? Gasped Wilbur. Certainly, she said. I eat flies, bugs, grasshoppers, beetles, moths, butterflies, cockroaches, gnats, daddy longlegs, centipedes, mosquitoes, crickets, anything that is careless enough to get caught in my web. I have to live, don't I? Why, yes, of course, said Wilbur. Do they taste good? Charlotte said, delicious. Of course, I don't really eat them. I drink them. I drink their blood. I love blood, said Charlotte. Don't say that, groaned Wilbur. Please don't say things like that. Why not? It's true. I have to say what is true. I am not entirely happy about my diet of flies and bugs, but it's the way I'm made. A spider has to pick up a living somehow or another, and I happen to be a trapper. I just naturally build a web and trap flies and other insects. My mother was a trapper before me. Her mother was a trapper before her. All of our family have been trappers. Way back for thousands and thousands of years, we spiders have been eating flies and bugs. It's a miserable inheritance, said Wilbur gloomingly. He was sad because his new friend was so bloodthirsty. Yes, it is, said Charlotte, but I can't help it. I don't know how the first spider in the early days of the world happened to think of this fancy idea of spinning a web, but she did, and it was clever of her too. And since then, all of us spiders have to work hard. It's just a trick. It's not a bad pitch on the whole. It's cruel, replied Wilbur. Well, you can't talk, said Charlotte. You have your meals brought to you every day in a pail. Nobody feeds me. I have to get my own food. I live by my wits. I have to be sharp and clever, unless I would then go hungry. I have to think things out, catch what I can, and take it when it comes. And it just so happens, my friend, that what comes are flies and bugs and insects. And furthermore, said Charlotte, do you realize that if I didn't catch bugs and eat them, bugs would increase and multiply and get so numerous that they would actually destroy the earth. They would wipe out everything. Really? Said Wilbur. I wouldn't want that to happen. Perhaps your web is a good thing after all. The goose had been listening to this conversation and chuckling to herself. There are a lot of things that Wilbur doesn't know about life, she thought. She started thinking some more. He's really a very innocent little pig. He doesn't even know what's going to happen to him around Christmas time. He has no idea that Mr. Zuckerman and Lurvy are plotting to kill him. And the goose raised herself a bit and poked at her eggs. Charlotte stood quietly over the fly, preparing to eat it. Wilbur lay down and closed his eyes. He was tired from his wakeful night and from the excitement of meeting a new friend for the first time. A breeze brought the smell of clover, the sweet-smelling world beyond his fence. Well, he thought, I've got a new friend all right. But what a gamble friendship is! Charlotte is fierce, brutal, scheming, and bloodthirsty. Everything I don't like. How can I learn to like her, even though she is pretty and, of course, very clever? Wilbur was merely suffering the doubts and fears that often go with finding a new friend. In good times, he was to discover that he was mistaken about Charlotte. Underneath her rather bold and cruel exterior, she had a kind heart, and she was to prove loyal and true to the very end. And that's the end of chapter 5.